Hello guys, welcome back to my another video. I'm Joel and this is the first video of the critical thinking and logical reasoning series. So this video is specialized to those who want to take IMAT test and actually those tests which contain critical thinking and logical reasoning section. So this video is for you guys. First of all, I have to mention that I created a video about introduction to IMAT. So if you didn't watch this video or missed it, you can click in here, which I place a card in here, so you can click on it and watch the video first, and then if you want to take IMAT you can watch this video. In this video I will tell you which type of questions in the critical thinking and logical reasoning section you will face, and actually it contains 7 types, so I will go through all of them in this video, and after this video I will make one by one by the examples and also the tricks that I used for answering them in the IMAT 2021. So you guys can follow this series, but actually I'm trying to record all of them in less than 1 week, and you guys, for supporting me, can subscribe me and like this video and introduce me to your friends who want to take IMAT, who likes Torino, who likes Italy actually. So I will be so glad if you support me, and this makes me much more motivated to make more videos about you guys, about IMAT, about other tests, and actually about Torino. So let's go guys. So this is the first slide of our first lecture. So in this slide, I just introduced myself, my channel, Joel Med, and actually, so you can subscribe me for further videos actually for critical thinking series. So we are going to next slide. So in the next slide, I introduced you guys to different types of questions. So as I wrote here, in the critical thinking category, there are 7 different specific types of questions. The first type is summarizing the main conclusion, which I will go through it in the next video, and drawing conclusion, which I will go step by step. After summarizing the main conclusion, I will go to for drawing conclusion and then identifying an assumption. Number 4 is assessing the impact of additional. So you have to determine which passage or statement can strengthen our given passage, and also which statement is against or weakening our presented passage. So in number 5, we have evidence detecting reasoning error. So by errors we can conclude that finding the flaw is for example, you have to find the problem between the statements which we have, and then the problem which we have in the conclusion. For example, you have to check the relation between the statements in the passage and also the conclusion. And then number 6, matching arguments, applying principles. So we have to find parallel reasoning, and also in some parts you have to find, for example, which pattern they are following each other. So in next slide I will show you the priority of importance of every spec and sections of the IMAT, or actually critical thinking series. So it's not for IMAT actually, it's for other, also it's for TSA and BMAT test and also other tests. So as you guys see, we can give them priority. The first one is summarize conclusion, which is much more difficult, and also you can learn it easily other than others. So and next one is assumption and flaw, and then identifying conclusion, and then all of them in the row. So we will go through all of them step by step. So in the next video I just want to tell you about how we have to summarize the conclusion and find the conclusion, main conclusion, actually not all conclusion, because in some passages we have different conclusions. For example, in one passage we can have 3 conclusion, but 2 of them are intermediate conclusion, and 1 of them is a main and final conclusion. So in next slide I'm trying to tell you a small definition, and a small summarizing of the first type of questions. I mean, summarizing the main conclusion or finding the main conclusion. In this type of questions, you have to judge which one of the statements A to E best expresses the main conclusion of the argument. So, the first important step is to read the passage carefully and pick out the sentence which is conclusion. So, remember that the conclusion can appear anywhere within an argument. So, it's not necessary in the, for example, first part of the passage. It's not in the end of the passage. So, it cannot be. It can be in the middle, or actually, it can be in the end or first. It's not. There is not any rule or anything. So, you have to focus in every part of the passage. So, an important thing is sometimes a passage may have an intermediate conclusion, as I said previously. So, which is just one of the steps in the reasoning towards the main conclusion. Be careful to check this. So, in the next video, I will tell you how to determine which is intermediate conclusion and which is a main conclusion. Our next slide is saying that assumption is. It was difficult for me because you have to tell which is not in the passage. You have to recognize the assumption of the author. An assumption is something which is not stated in the argument, but which is taken for granted in order to draw the conclusion. So you need first to identify the conclusion of the argument, then look for reasoning it gives to support this conclusion, and think about any important point which is not actually stated in the reasoning. So the important thing about this type of questions you have to know is that these types of questions are not shown directly, but you need to make an assumption. So for example, make an assumption is not, for example, you are saying by your own idea. You have to say an assumption which can be concluded or which can be assumed by the given passage. So in the next type of questions we have flaw or erroring. This type of questions ask you to identify the flaw in the argument, which means that you must explain why the conclusion does not follow from the reasons which are given. So you need to be clear about what the conclusion is and what reasons are meant to support it. So for example, you have to say what are your statements are saying and what is our conclusion. So there is some unrelated thing between these two parts of conclusion and also statement. So also in this part I will tell you my tricks and tips to determine them better. So you have to detect the problem between the reasons and final conclusion, describe why they are not related. So in the statements, for example, given option A to E, there is one thing. So you have to one thing is which for example telling much more better than others about why they are not related. So in another type of questions we have drawing a conclusion. So they are similar, maybe they may similar to finding conclusion, but no, they are not similar. Because in the drawing a conclusion you have to draw and make a conclusion, okay? So but in the finding and summarizing a conclusion, you have to summarize and find the conclusion which is stated in the passage, in the present passage. So in the drawing conclusion, so the main difference is that in the drawing conclusion you have to make a conclusion. For example, you have to draw a conclusion. But in the finding or summarizing a conclusion, main conclusion, you have to state the conclusion which presented in the passage. In this type of questions, candidates are asked which conclusion follows from the information given. You need to consider each statement A to E and to think about whether the information is in the passage gives you good reasons to accept the statement. It seems it's similar to finding a conclusion, but not. Because in this type you have to draw and make a conclusion. We will go through them in next videos one by one. Okay. In another type of questions, we are discussing about assessing the impact of additional evidence. So it means that which option or which statement strains the main conclusion, which statement in the above must weakening the, for example, main conclusion or presented conclusion. So presented passage. These type of questions will typically ask you to consider what would weaken or strengthen an argument. You need to first to be clear about what the argument is trying to establish. Work out what the conclusion is, and then consider what effect each of the possible answers would have on the conclusion. For example, these possible answers or statements which we have A to E, you have to compare them which must weaken or strengthen the main conclusion or actually whole passage. This section needs more attention on statements and check. One statement have to be related to the main passage. Then they should be agree or strengthen and disagree for weakening the passage. So in another type of question is matching arguments. This type of questions ask you about similarity between arguments, but not the sort of similarity where two arguments are about the same topic. So what is the sort of similarity? The sort of similarity is that they are following each other by the pattern. So for example, you have to check them by the pattern, so they are following. For example, I'm going out and then I'm going to work. So a statement should follow this pattern. For example, like I'm going to a school and I'm studying, so this type of pattern I mean. So in this type of in the video which related to this type, I will explain more completed for you guys, so don't worry. For instance, one passage might draw a conclusion by the help of three chain statements, and this looks similar structure between this passage and correct statement. So in another and maybe it's final type of questions is applying principle, which is uncommon to IMAT, but actually you have to know because there is some probability to have it in the IMAT 2022 or more in the future years. So when you are asked which statement illustrates the principle underlying the passage, you must first identify this principle. A principle is a general recommendation which in the passage will be applied to just one particular case, but which could also be applied to other cases. For example, you have to, it's not like a conclusion or something like that, but you have to know, for example, what is the main thing which author want to tell you. So for example, someone might use the principle killing is wrong in order to argue for pacifism. For example, for refusing to go to war, if we are to accept the principle that killing is wrong, then it also follows that capital punishment is wrong, and even that killing is in self-defense is wrong. So in order to answer this type of questions, you first need to understand the argument, so look for the conclusion and for the reasons in the usual way. This should enable you to see what principle and the argument relies on in order to draw its conclusions. Okay, so you then need to consider each possible answer to see which one follows from the principle. So actually this is very long passage. I want to summarize it. Just look for the main thing and also the relation of the main thing which author is saying in the passage and main conclusion. So gather them all and you can get the main principle. This is it. This is our final slide of the first lecture, and I will describe you summarizing the main conclusion of finding it in the next video. Good luck, guys.